It is my time. It is my time to share the pain I've endured, witnessed, and been through. It is my time to share my testimony. And I am sick currently, so bear with me. But this isn't for the faint hearted or anything like that. This is for the people who truly care and the people who might need a story to uplift them. So, to start things off with, I grew up, and God was always real in my head. It didn't make sense to me about why I had to go to church every day to believe in somebody I already believed in, and this was growing up. It didn't make sense to me why I had to listen to what others had to say about God because I was already connected with God and I I don't know, I just knew him, like um so anyways, growing up, it was a fairly broken family, I would say, we would get in trouble for dumb things. We weren't allowed to be kids. Um we and this is my brother and I ended up getting a little sister along the lines, but for the most part, my brother and I were taught to hate each other. Anytime we had fun and we were told to be quiet or settle down or not be kids, um, we learned that that came with a price, and we quickly learned that if we stopped having fun, if we stopped being kids together, if we stopped loving each other, we would not get in as much trouble. Um, so, alongside that, I had an older sister and an older brother. My older sister and her stepdad, my real dad, didn't get along very well. She saw through what I couldn't, and that caused a lot of problems. She did lie a lot. At the end, she tried anything she could to get them in trouble with the law, and at some point, the law just stopped listening to her because there was a fine line between making stuff up to get somebody in trouble and actually there's something being wrong, and the law didn't look at what was actually wrong, they looked at what wasn't wrong, and that would be her lies. So, I grew up in a fairly broken family. When I turned 18, this was a year I really tried to put behind me because it wasn't just one thing, and it wasn't just two things, it was one thing after another. I don't remember which order these went in, but I became friends with someone who was diagnosed with a rare brain tumor. They lost everybody, Nobody wanted to be around him. Nobody knew how to be around him. That's a really tough thing to see, and that's a really tough thing to be around. So, while he was in the middle of losing people, I was in the middle of making sure he was okay. Later that year, and again, I don't remember what order this went in, but at some point that year, one of my close friends gets in a really, really bad car accident. Like he is lucky to be alive. Like, you know what I mean? So, that same friend also lost his father that same year. And out of all days, it was on Thanksgiving Day. You know, and I can only imagine what it would be like to lose somebody that close to you on a day that's supposed to be that special. That day isn't necessarily just a holiday. That day is literally about being grateful for what you have, and he lost sight of that, because I can only imagine what something like that would do to someone. Um, then, sometime that year, I lost another friend, not due to a death or anything, but he got really jealous, started getting really angry, started making fun of me, started causing a lot of problems. I didn't understand why. You know, I've already got all this other stuff going on, and here he is wanting to start more trouble. I'm just done with it. So, at one point, I go to my parents, and, I talk to my mom first. She's usually the middle grounds, like, does this sound like a good idea? Is this something possible? And she said, yeah, we just need to talk about it with your dad. So, I wanted to be homeschooled. I got, we got talking about it. I realized how possible it really was. There was no possibility to it. Because on top of everything else, I was dealing with a lot of bullying, like relentless bullying. Like, there's no need for it. I'm already going through all this other, and everybody's just wanting to put me down. My family, my friends, everybody around me. So, I get done talking to my dad about it because at this point, there is no possibility of it. Um, so I really struggled in school because of the bullying. My parents wanted me to do better, and they really got on my case about needing to do better. And I go to them about wanting to do better, and we get done with that conversation. I get up to go get a drink, and next thing you know, my dad's in my face. Like, literally, not even an inch away. I put my hands up in defense because I don't know what's about to happen, and next thing you know, I'm thrown up against the couch, and my dad claims that he was defending himself. But you don't defend yourself if you're in the position he was in. You only. I don't know, it's really hard to explain, but he was in my face. He threw me up against the couch, and I hit my neck slash right shoulder on the wood of that couch, or the frame of that couch, and I've had problems with that shoulder ever since. I can't lift heavy things with that shoulder. He doesn't take any accountability or responsibility for that event. I don't even know if he remembers about that event because he just does not accept the responsibility for it. And I don't shove it down his throat. I don't constantly bring it up. I don't do anything because that's in the past. So, a couple of years go by, more like 4 or 5 years go by, and I meet this girl. The way we met was something magical. It wasn't just a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences at all. And after analyzing a lot of that time error, I understand the devil had a lot to play in that because not only did I have the girl in my dreams, I had a house. I had a mortgage on a house. I had a good job. I was working towards becoming store manager. I was working my dream job, which was writing articles for a website. I really wanted to be a writer. Um, I had a car, um, and I had a kid on the way at some point too. Um, so again, I don't remember what lines up first outside of me meeting this girl. How we met was very strange. We actually met on WoW. I was YouTubing at the time. I had around 2,000 subscribers. No big deal. And I get this friend request. I get friend requests ever so often on that game, just because of the YouTube channel. So I usually don't think much of it. But when I got her friend request, there was just something about it. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know if it was going to be a relationship, a long term friendship, or, a lesson or anything like that. I didn't know what was in store. So, as as I accept her friend request and we get to talking, we find out we really like each other. And there's one day I went to her and I was like, "Can I ask you something? I want to ask you this when I get off work. I don't want. I want to focus on work right now. I want to. I just I wanted to prepare myself for this question." She says to me something along the lines, "Yeah, you can ask me whenever you're ready, but I have a question for you too." So I tell her, let's send it at the same time, because I had a feeling I knew what her question was, and she probably had a feeling of what my question was. So we send this message. There's a little delay in the messages because we can't exactly send it at the exact same time. We both asked the same question, and that was if we wanted to be in a relationship. You know, so this girl I'm talking about holds a very special place in my heart. Um, not because I'm not over her, but because she taught me a lot. I've healed a lot. I have learned a lot from her. So, at some point, um, she gets pregnant and I have a kid on the way. And one day, she's telling me she had a miscarriage, and this was uh, fairly far off from when she got pregnant. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is she was like 7 or 8 months pregnant, maybe even closer to 9 months mark. And I don't fully remember because that's something I try not to dwell over. But she claims to have had a miscarriage. My parents claim she had an abortion. I don't know which is which. I'd like to believe her over my parents. And a lot of that's because I saw how much my parents intervened in that relationship. There was one point when she was real kind to me, real nice, real loving, very motherly. And then all of a sudden she stopped. And I was like, wait a minute, this isn't the same person I fell in love with. And I realized it's because I wasn't the same person she fell in love with. At some point, I started listening to my parents more than I let her show me who she was. So, we start to struggle, because who wouldn't at that point, your parents intervene with your relationship. This is a long term or a long distance relationship. So, very easily manipulable, you know. Your experience your parents have more experience than you do. So therefore they should know better and they should know what to look for and what signs to avoid and stuff like that. And they were telling me all of these signs that I didn't fully see, but I believed them because they have more experience than me. You know, they know better than me. They can see what I can't, or so I thought. So we start to struggle, and I do everything at this point to try and fix the relationship. It was already gone. I sold the house so I could go visit her more. I lost my job because one of my cars, I had lost two cars going up to visit her. The first car I lost blowing the engine, and I had really no way of getting anywhere unless somebody came and picked me up. I lost my job in the process because I was gone for 3 weeks. I was only supposed to be gone for a week. So, not only had I lost a car, I lost my job, I lost my house, I lost my writing job, I lost everything. And there's a lot that went on that time era too. So, let me explain a little bit more in detail what went on. There was one day, I don't remember what happened, but I just felt off, something felt wrong, and I feared that I might lose her. And this was before there were any doubts, I guess. I don't know why. For me, there was just that one doubt of like, what happens if I lose her? So I grabbed my pills. There were probably close to 90 of them. I grabbed all my pills, various different kinds, and I throw them all in a bag. And I start walking, and I go alongside the railroad tracks. And at this time, I'm not able to message her. She was either busy or something was going on, and she could not message me, so I could not get the clarity of where our relationship was. So from there, I end up texting my mom because I really don't want to fall into those thoughts. You know what I mean? Those aren't very happy thoughts. I don't like thinking unhappy thoughts. And that day it was just very overwhelming. So I messaged my mom, and I'm basically like, I don't want to do this. I told her where I was, which direction I was going. A couple miles down the railroad tracks, I see this sheriff car. They had found me, you know, and I didn't really have many plans of taking those pills or what I was going to do, outside of I had those pills and I was walking the railroad tracks. There would have come a point to where I either took them. If I didn't message my mom, I would have either taken them or I would have figured something out. I'm very strong-minded usually. I usually try to figure things out. So what I mean by that is if I decided I wasn't going to take those pills, I probably would have walked back home. Regardless, it probably would have been a couple of hour walk, but I would have figured it out. So I'm greeted by the sheriffs, and I don't know. I don't fully remember how this happened because, I was suicidal. I had suicidal uh, tendencies and stuff like that. I had pills on me. I was very tempted to do it. And the sheriff asks me, "Do you want me to take you to the hospital or do you want me to take you home?" And I was like, "I don't know." And he was like, "Okay." So he takes me to the hospital. Um, I'm then seen by a couple specialists, evaluations and stuff like that, find out what's going on. We get to the medicine part of it, and the psychiatrist is asking me, "Are you allergic to anything?" And I'm like, "I'm not 100% sure because at this time I wasn't, but I think I'm allergic to the tricyclic family." Without, uh, without really hearing my warning, he puts me on a medication that was part of that family. I told him not to put me on that. And he's like, "It's not going to hurt you. You'll be fine. It's a small dosage." Um, so I start taking it. Very first night, I remember being on the phone with my mom. And I just remember telling her I don't feel well. And she told me, "Go sit down." So I go out to the dining area, cafeteria, like, uh, it was a common grounds basically where people just went and hung out. So I do that, and somewhere along the way, I had to have said, "I think I'm gonna have a seizure," and the I don't remember what status he was. He was kind of like security, but kind of not. You know, he he stopped me from hitting the ground completely. And the only unless if he just sensed it, it was either that one of those two. You know what I mean? Either I said something or he sensed it. So they rushed me to the ER. I'm fully awake, fully conscious. I know exactly what happened, but I'm unable to speak. I mean, I was able to speak, but very, very few words. Like, how are you feeling? Okay. I'm feeling okay. So, from there, we get to the ER, and they don't have a room for me, but everybody is astonished by my vitals. And I was very confused about why. Everybody that passed me was like, "Look at this guy's vitals." They were kind of like in shock, like, "Is this real? How is how is this possible?" I get into a room. This is probably an hour later. I don't actually know because I was just so far gone, basically. I should have been dead right then and there. I get to the room and they start getting me stabilized. My pulse is on in the 30s, low 30s, like 32 to 30. I remember thinking, if I see it hit 29, I'm dead. That's what I kept thinking. I have talked to other medical professionals and stuff like that, and they are very astonished by the fact that I was still even awake and conscious and still awake, still alive. So, when I get out of the ER, or actually, let me back up. So, during the moment of the ER, I felt weird. I felt alone, but not alone. I felt very. This is a part I really don't know how to explain because what I'm trying to say is I met God. I've always believed in him. I didn't necessarily grow up in his words, don't get me wrong, but um, the way I did grow up, um, it taught me everything to hate God, but I didn't because he, I, I did not understand how people could not believe in him, if that makes sense. Like, out of everything that happened before that moment, I personally don't understand how I believed in him either, but I did. Um, so while all of that is happening, I meet God, and He says, "Don't tempt me again. When I give you a sign, after you ask for it, you either have the options of taking it as the sign it is, or you can either just ignore it, but don't ask me for signs if you're just going to ignore it." That was a very big part of my life. That was a very big part of my awakening, I guess. Not necessarily awakening, but like, oh, this is very real. I remember being in that room, and I remember being in like a third person point of perspective, and it was almost like purgatory, I would say. Um, because I felt very alone, but I felt very comforted. Like it felt right. It felt okay. So after that happens, I get out of the hospital, go back to the mental hospital, and I see the psychiatrist. He looks at me and he laughs at me. He literally laughed at me and says, "That was a small dosage. You should not have had that reaction." And I didn't know what to say, because I was just like, I don't understand what's funny about this. It literally just happened. I literally had a seizure. I'm not making this up. So, when part of the discharge papers, they wanted me to have CT scans, they wanted me to have follow up appointments, they wanted me to have all of this because I had a seizure there. And it could not have been the medication, but it was. I didn't find out later that I could take actions on that, and later, as in, it's too late now. So, as that's happening, not very fun stuff. This is very early on in my relationship as well, so there's a lot more to come. And I'm not going to talk about everything that went wrong or how it happened or what was traumatic or anything just because I don't fully remember it all and I don't remember a lot of the details, but somewhere along the lines, on my way up to visit her, this was when we were struggling the most. I went up to visit her, and 12-hour drive. She knew I was coming. Things were supposed to be good. Everything was supposed to be good. On my way up, there was no distinct difference between rain and snow at that time. It went from literally pouring down rain to just come full out white out, in the matter of not even a split second. Like, I don't know how to explain it. It just literally went from raining to snowing just like that. And by the time I realized I need to slow down, it was too late. I hit a patch of black ice. I slid for probably 102 miles or 102 feet. And as I'm sliding, I'm thinking to myself, and I feel this presence, but I mean, this time it's not God. It's more like a calming, a very, like, just stay calm, just whatever you do, just stay calm. So I did. I had my hands on the steering wheel as I was losing control. I wasn't panicking, I wasn't doing anything outside of thinking everything's gonna be okay. I hit the bank of the highway and my car rolls a couple of times. I'm very lucky to be alive. Again. And keep in mind, this is all at the same time era as well. This all involves being around my ex. So I almost died twice, you know, basically for her. Um, I go to the hospital, I get checked out. Nothing's wrong. I just have a bump on my head. I don't have any soreness. The next morning, nothing. It's almost like I wasn't even in a wreck. To back things up a little bit, when I got out of the hospital, I was already in Canada. I was about 6 hours in, and I'm like, well, I can either get a bus to go home or I can get a bus to go see her. As you could probably already guess, I went and got a bus to go see her because that's what I was going up there for. That is what I planned on doing. I didn't have any plans but to go see her. So at that point, I get up there and she doesn't want to see me. I don't understand why. She's upset because I was in a wreck. I get it. But I was just in a wreck and she didn't want to see me. And at that point, I knew that we wouldn't last. Because ultimately, that that time I was up there is when we parted ways. And then I don't know. I just I'm losing my train of thought now just because I've not ever spoken about this fully with anyone. But I lost her, you know. And after that, that was the hardest part of my life, like it even topped me almost dying, because I when I care for people, I truly care for them. There is no light switch where it just says, "Oh, well, I don't care for you anymore." You know what I mean? And it took me a good 5 years to get over her. You know, I've had a lot of people tell me I'm still not over her, but who are they to tell me? They don't know how I feel. They only know how I speak about it. And I speak about it with great care because she was a very meaningful person to me. I'm not going to sit there and talk crap about somebody that meant so much to me, regardless of the outcome. So, after her and I go our separate ways, I remember sitting at my parents in their backyard. I just went to the furthest part of the backyard and I just sat down and I wept. Um, I was so upset with God. You know what I mean? Like, how could you do this? You know? He helped guide me through it, you know? And there was a lot of doubt at that time. Not about God, about everything. That's when I started smoking pot. That's when I got into not necessarily bad habits, but I got into things to help heal the pain. Um, Sorry guys, I'm trying to think here, but it's just a lot, you know, and I keep going through more stuff, more stuff I shouldn't have to. And at some point, I keep asking myself, when is life actually worth living? You know, and as hard as that is to hear, what makes life worth living for me is God and the promise God gave me. Because during that moment, I was with him in the hospital after the doctor gave me the medication I told him not to put me on. And during that moment, I responded to him and said, I need to get back to my family, meaning my girlfriend at the time. You know, like I have a family. I need to get back to him. I don't have the option of dying right now. I have to get back to him. I will spread your word in glory. And ever since, I have tried very hard to. At the start, it wasn't the greatest, but the more I learned, the easier it became. And the easier it became, the more I shared. And there's a lot of trauma and traumatic events happening to me still to this day. Like, things that shouldn't even be a question. It shouldn't even be a thought, but it is. Like, why am I still putting up with it? My point behind this testimony wasn't to tell you guys about my past, it was to tell you about God. Because, in my personal opinion, you can't truly know who God is, understand who He is, or believe who He is until you have come to face Him. Because at some point, there's a very big realization there. Like, you should be dead, you're not dead, and you were saved. That is a very big realization. Um, I think I'm going to end this here. So, thanks for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day.